Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of Reforming Academia. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Chloe Kurt.
And I'm Dr. Victoria.
Welcome. So, the structure of this podcast, the reason we're doing it is, well, Vicky and I have been friends for years, and I feel like offline we're always chatting about and complaining about academia. And so we decided, honestly, Vicky, you said it well yourself, is change starts with talking about it. So that's kind of the goal of this podcast. The structure will be, we'll usually have like a specific topic that we'll chat about in the episode, and then also have like stories that people can share. This episode, since it's the first one, we thought maybe we'd start by just introducing ourselves and a little bit about why we wanted to make this podcast. So Vicky, do you want to take it away?
Sure.
Science is for everyone.
As Chloe had mentioned that I had wrote a lot on her recent posts about some of the changes that could be made in academia and going into my background. So I did my bachelor's in biology at Florida International University. Then I went to do my PhD also at Florida International University in biochemistry. And then I transitioned into a postdoc at Yale School of Medicine, and I did a year postdoc. Really kind of found out that I really don't like a lot of the things that I'm currently seeing in academia. It has actually nothing to do with Yale. I think Yale has made significant changes. It was more about, in general, my whole experience as a grad student and even before being a grad student when I was doing research as an undergrad. And then I took some time off to figure out what I kind of wanted to do. And at the end of my PhD, my professor was kind of very suggesting that I try maybe going into teaching because he thought that I would be very good at it. And I was in general when I was teaching, I kind of liked it, but when you're an overworked grad student, teaching is not really enjoyable. So it's not really to say that, oh, my experience was great teaching as a PhD student. I just really didn't have time to dedicate to teaching. Most of it was being overworked and underpaid. So I decided to try out teaching, and I had 2 part-time jobs of an adjunct faculty at 2 different universities this past semester, and I actually found out that I really like it when you're being paid fairly and and when you actually have smaller class sizes and you have TAs and learning assistants and faculty that's there to support you through the teaching. So I will continue on teaching and probably be applying for full-time positions starting within next year because I think that teaching has changed the way I see also academia, because I believe, well, we can talk about it through this podcast about how there should be separating a lot of the research with teaching faculty, and I think that's where a lot of academia is now going into, where we have separate teaching faculty and separate research faculty, because just because you do research doesn't mean you can teach well. That's a
Pretty awesome. So Vicky and I, we both did grad school in Florida together. Not the same grad school, but we did meet up a couple times since you were FIU, I was University of Miami. But bit of backstory of myself. So I did undergrad at University of Wisconsin-Madison, fell in love in research, like getting to do science research at the bench. Followed that passion on to grad school. So I did my PhD at University of Miami in biochemistry, molecular biology, and I loved research. I loved the hands-on. Now I'm starting to find myself missing the bench and missing doing experiments and stuff. But what ultimately drove me away from academia was the politics, the things that essentially we want to talk about changing in academia on this podcast. We both went through it in various shapes and forms, and I feel like I came out of grad school and I graduated, left the lab in 2023, got my diploma in 2024. I left pretty jaded, to be frank. I left academia very abruptly, went into patent law for a couple years, and then I did patent law and I was like, I don't know, because I still missed like hands-on, I don't know, thinking, talking about science literature and being at the forefront of those new discoveries. And so I guess I'm at that in-between part, like where Vicky said she's like on the next step of finding her love for teaching. I guess I'm at this in-between of trying to figure out where this passion, my love, goes next. Somewhere at the intersection of science research, science discoveries. Fortunately, I don't see myself going back to academia anytime soon because of there's just a lot of problems going on with academia that don't need to be the case. Hopefully, by shedding some light on these, I mean, the long-term goal, hopefully, of this podcast is part to talk about the issues, but I want to figure out, maybe through conversations, then maybe bring on other people too, how we can make small changes that can radically improve academia, because it's not going to be an overnight thing change. Yeah, I do see it as something. You get so many of those tenured professors who say, well, I went through it so you can deal with it too, but it doesn't need to be that case. And your experiences, and maybe you could talk about this a little bit, because when you've chatted to me about the differences of your grad school program versus moving to Yale, even that's night and day in my mind compared to what we dealt with, which is similar experiences, I'd say. The bad parts of academia. So do you want to talk about, I don't know, the cool parts of what you learned at Yale?
Well, COVID to Yale, I was kind of a little bitter going in the sense that I came in and I found out that grad students are getting paid over 50K a year. They get one of the best health insurance that I've ever seen being offered, as I get the same health insurance because my husband is at Yale. And I am telling you that this insurance covers everything you can imagine. And they get it 100% covered. They get dental care included. They get 401k. They're pretty much get very like a lot of support from their programs in general with whatever they need. And that kind of very much upset me because during my PhD, I started with a salary, I believe, of 26 when I started my PhD in
In South
2018.
Florida, too.
South Florida, yes, which you can't live on. I lived with, in the beginning of my PhD, with three roommates because I could not afford my own place. Our health insurance was not 100% covered. It was only like partially covered. It was like 80% covered. And we had like no dental care, no vision care, no 401k. Pretty much you get almost no support from your department. And talking about 26K getting paid is like it's if you're not on a fellowship or your PI cannot pay you, you're teaching. And you're teaching two lab courses that are 30 students each. That's 60 students a semester. A That's a lot of work.
That's a
Um,
job in itself, and then
yeah.
you're supposed to do that on the side just to supplement your research.
Yeah, and when you're a first year student, when you have 60 students to teach, you have classes to take, and your PI still expects for you, or you're doing rotations, and you still have to put in like a normal 40 hours a week of research. You're working almost 80 to 90 hours a week. Um, so going into Yale, where
While not even making a minimum wage.
yes, and at Yale, I come, and then the students roll into the lab at 10 a.m. and they leave at 5, and they're like perfectly happy. And I think that's great for them. I'm not saying that I think like work and life balance is so crucial for in order to succeed in academia. And my PI very much pushed that during my PhD. He was very much supportive of like me taking time off. He never was against me taking time off. He was very much like, yeah, make sure you get sleep, you get rest. But that's
A
kind of
burnt out.
hard when you're not like you have to teach and you have to. He was really my professor during the PhD really tried. He was really trying to fight the university bureaucracies. Like even when he got a grant, he wanted to increase our salaries even a bit more. But the university was like, we're capping in because we're capping the whole university. Uh, so doesn't even just start with the professors. It's the whole university needs to change. They were
Yeah.
capping everyone's salary just because so one PhD student would not get significantly large amount of money in comparison to the other because then it would be unfair. Um,
That's,
while I
I feel like also that's like the institutional changes. That's what a lot of professors. I mean, it sounds your professor seems like a really good, honestly, exception to the American norm. But I've heard so many professors too using the institution of saying like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, they're not going to let me do that, and then it's just like that's the end of the conversation.
While at Yale, like there's you have like if your professor denies you because they unionized, like you can report them to the university and they will take action.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, it's mandatory. It says in the contract for the PhD students and the postdocs, like they can take break off. We have sick days as well as PhD students and as
This is
postdocs.
why. this is why all schools we need a grad school union, because like I remember at my university it was such a controversial thing talking about unionizing, and it like taboo. I don't know, maybe it's because that's what the union words have, but
Hmm.
literally a union for grad students literally means getting a seat at the table. That's it. Like my grad school, I knew so many people who tried to get like Christmas break holidays. I was like, no, actually you've got to run a mouse experiment during this time. That's what their advisor would say. So you can't take off your Christmas holiday, and they had no recourse. Like what you're saying Yale has is incredible.
Yeah, it's you can't like there's no I mean Yale's is not perfect. You can't like there's tweaks that they can improve the system, but their unions are always fighting for to improve those things. And Yale's salary is set to increase every year, so it's not say they are getting increases. Like even my husband as a postdoc is getting raises every year. And there's not such a pressure because when you also know the students know that their university will support them. There's no when I was a under like PhD student, you were pretty much forced into like you have to apply for fellowships, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't because it's going to help your resume, but it was mainly because the professors had no money to pay you or the school had no money to pay you. That's a very different incentive because when my husband was applying for a fellowship now, he knows that his professor can pay him. That's never been an issue. They know the university will pay him, but it was more like it is going to help your resume. My husband took his time. My husband spent a lot of time editing. It was never about deadlines. It was never about like, oh, this is going to be dependent on my job and how I'm going to get paid. Everyone has different needs. Like, for example, like I cannot work the same hours as my husband works. Like I can only function maybe. Like I during my PhD, I came into the lab around I would say 8:30 and I was out by 6. I was like I can't work anymore. Like I will not even go home or read anything. I was like I can't
I was the same way.
function.
I treated my PhD much more like a job, like a 9 to 5, where I'd come in like 8 and leave late as 6, because it would be the days that I found myself. And of course, there's days that you do have to work the longer days, but I'd be so burnt out the next day if I had to pull those really long hours. And I also had a rule like I would try not to come on the weekends unless I really had to. Unless there was like a real big exception, which only happened a handful of times. It was like a hard. I was working on like cells in a petri dish. It's not like they were mouse experiments or anything that were time sensitive.
For my PhD, I only came on weekends when I had like experiments running on the weekends. But it was my PI was more like if you're gonna come work on the weekend, take like the this day off and then work on the weekend and then take like
Oh,
Monday off.
wow. Yeah,
And he
ours
was
was not like
never
that.
there to check to see if
Mhm.
I was like in the lab, like, and then if you forgot, he was like, "Oh, it's fine, like it's not a big deal." Um,
I just
that
think
really
people.
changed my PhD for me, but my PI was also
Mhm.
on the younger side. You could see the big difference of like younger PIs and the older PIs, and then also how you're trained has a huge impact because during my postdoc, I noticed that like I guess my postdoc I think had very stricter uh, training before.
Hours. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
he worked 24/7, but I'm like, you work 24/7, but I don't think I can work
Yeah,
24/7.
and I also think that, I mean, even talking about like how you and your husband and like me and like other people in my lab, we all work we all work best with different hours. So I think having people set like say my 9 to 5 schedule definitely didn't work for some of my colleagues who, yeah, they wanted to sleep in till later in the afternoon, but then they work later into the evening. I feel like we all have our different hours that we work best, and that's kind of one of the benefits of academia to a certain extent is we get those flexible hours. But then if you have overbearing PIs that like set those specific like you need to be in the office 9 to 5 every day plus come in on the weekends, that's like the recipe to burnout.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, and also when you don't have a supportive PI where it tells you like, hey, listen, like let's have these like flexibilities, it's kind of hard for you to do anything.
You know
But
what? Sorry, I just realized something. If people, because we're talking about this as a very like we understand the American academic PhD, biomedical PhD structure, but maybe we should do a brief overview of what it's like for, I don't know, people that aren't familiar with it or people that aren't from the American academic system, because even like how different countries do things are really different. And that I feel like as this goes on this podcast, the we can learn some things from how other countries do it, because I think America has fallen behind. I mean, maybe we should start with the basics. So the PhD on average for biomedical sciences is, I think, on paper 5.5 years. Is that what you've heard too?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like oftentimes though it's like 5.5 years on paper, but then you get a lot of times people will do like a postdoc in the same lab afterwards to finish up whatever papers and experiments that they were working on. So I feel like 5.5 years is a bit on the generously short side
It is.
of it all.
I
Yeah.
know most of the people that I've heard are at least 6 to 7 years it takes for them to
Yeah.
finish.
But the difference is that in the American academic system, you don't necessarily have to have done a master's first. I don't, Vicky, did you do a master's first?
No.
No, okay, I didn't either. So I feel like, I mean, there's depends on the schools. Like some universities definitely prefer it, department by department, but then other ones don't care at all. Versus like the European system, I'm pretty sure most places require a master's before you do a PhD.
I think in China as well.
Okay. So that, I mean, a big difference too. So if you're getting someone like a naive, I would say like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed undergrad, going straight into a PhD program, the learning curves are so steep versus say if you've even done a master's beforehand, you're going to have some sort of understanding of how academia or maybe that university is structured. Do you want to touch on maybe, because I know it's university specific, but like the process of, like, did you guys do qualifying exams and stuff like that halfway through?
Yeah, so I would just before even that, like transitioning from undergrad, even if you did research, it's very much I was still in the like this little naive bubble, not knowing the politics, thinking that oh, I know what PhD is going to entail, and then
I
going
thought it'd
into
just be
my PhD.
working a lot of hours.
Yeah.
I had no thought, like, one thing I wish I could have gone back and tell myself is don't pick your PI based on the project, pick it based on their, like, personality and who they are as an individual.
I have to say that first for me would have to be not just personality. First, you have to number one essential that they have money, and then number two, the most important is that their personality. Nothing else matters. Your project doesn't matter. And like as long as you will always find, because personally, at least for me, I was like I will always find something interesting to work on, and I find science in general engaging. So the project wasn't a big deal for me, but it's a matter of like that the PI can support you no matter what, and that they are actually a supportive person on like on their own.
And your
Um,
project can change too. Like the project that I signed up for at the start of my PhD was nothing like how it was when I ended. So even if you're like you're like, oh yeah, this advisor seems sketch, but I really like this project, like that's not a good bet to be making.
yeah. For my PhD is you how our program went was you get admitted, and you're either already kind of predetermined which lab you're going to be in based on you already like had an agreement with the professor, or you're doing rotations. So we had
Which was
three
more common for you, the rotations or the direct admit?
rotations.
Because that's also something different. Because like in America, for the large part, everyone does rotations. Like you join an umbrella program and do rotations for 3, 4 different labs over a few weeks, maybe a few weeks in each one to figure out your best fit. Versus a lot, at least European schools, I know a lot of the times it's direct admit where you're applying specifically to a professor's opening. Which on the outset, I feel like American academia being set up in those rotation systems seems great because you're able to get like a taste of how those different labs are. But I don't know about you. I feel like the reality is you don't really get the true sense
You
of the
get the
lab, right?
bubble.
Yes, they give you like the the prettiest on paper looking things. The PI will treat you the nicest, and it's even weird though because even grad students like in that lab, even if it's a really toxic lab, they don't necessarily. They're like they don't tell you it's a really bad place to be, and I never quite understood that. Like that happened to me, that the older PhD students said they didn't want to like tell me how bad it was because they didn't want to get back to the PI, and I was like, but you could have saved me from years of trauma.
Yeah, I agree with that, that it's very much like just like the really nice shining cover that no one knows what's actually on the inside of the lab. Um, for Yale, I think the rotations are mandatory. So even if you're already had like some kind of an agreement with the professor saying like, oh, like I would like to work in your lab for my PhD, they cannot go around the rotations. You have to do the
Good.
rotations.
Were you director rotation?
I was doing rotations. I did come into the program where my undergrad PI is a part of the program where I thought that that's where I might want to stay in. But then after some reflection, I realized that I was like, well, there's no money here, the reality of it, and I won't be like I'll be struggling my whole PhD. So and I'm like, there's not going to be a lot I can learn from a lab that I already spent like 3 years working in.
I
So
feel that's what something else I've heard because people that stay at their same lab from undergrad to grad school, which does happen, is you're limiting yourself in terms of like breadth of experience, right? Because I'd always heard that like you shouldn't even stay necessarily at the same university for undergrad to grad school, and I kind of disagree with that because I feel like you learn. You stay at the same lab then or the same university because you did
I stayed
FIU
in the same
undergrad?
year. Yeah.
Because I moved and I heard other people. I don't know. Wait, actually, what's your take on that? Do you
I think
think? Oh.
um I think you can still learn. I mean, there's so much like obviously there's so much research faculty that you probably don't know. Like there is so much I learned through my PhD lab that I would have probably never learned even at Yale, I would have to say. Like I came into Yale and I was like, wow, you guys don't know this stuff, but there's I guess we can touch on that as well, like the differences, the benefits of going to a smaller research university versus just a larger university and things you learn and things that you don't. Um, but at FIU, at least how it worked was that at least my program, because the programs are different through FIU and the biochemistry program, is that I did rotations. And after 3 rotations, you kind of have to choose. Our
Mhm.
rotations were a bit longer. I know at Yale they were a bit shorter than what I did at FIU. And the professor has to give feedback and you give and it kind of has to like align. The professor wants to take you and you want to go into that lab.
Mhm.
So for the first 2 rotations, I stayed in my undergrad lab because I wasn't sure if I wanted to change. And then I realized in the second rotation I do want to change. So I went to my PhD PI. And what really stood out for me wasn't the money, like because the money was actually running out in that lab. Uh, but was because the professor came with the structure and I was like, this is exactly what I want. The professor came in, he even had a contract where he was like, this is what I will give to you and this is what I will expect from you. And I was like, I like this formality. I like
Shouldn't that
reporting.
be I feel like that should be what a standard. Like everyone should be doing that. Not like you're like, oh, this great PI because he actually had a plan of what he wanted me to do for my PhD.
Yeah, and it's not just about what he wanted me to do for my PhD, it's what he was going to offer me as
Mhm.
a PI. Like, what was going to be his mentorship for me? Because it's not just about what you're going to give them, it's about what you're going to get out of them. So he came very much structured, was like, okay, we will try to do this and this and this. We'll try to go to like this many conferences. We will work on this and this and this. And this is what I will expect for you. You're gonna there was never like you're gonna work 24/7, like no vacations. I think during my PhD I took one at a point where we were still waiting for the funding to come in. And the university was processing, and there was really not much for me to do in the lab. Like I really needed ingredients, and I couldn't. I was just showing up to lab, and I was like, okay, I could do some minor things in the lab, but nothing big. He's just like, just take the whole month off, like.
Wow.
So me and my lab mate was traveling to her home country, and I was like, okay, I'll go on vacation. So I went on vacation for like 2 weeks. So
Wow, that's nice. I feel like my thing when I started my PhD, and this is maybe as a red flag to people, is I was supposed to be in a rotation program, and then the PI that I wanted, like I picked because I thought really cool research, said I'll only let you join the lab if you do direct admit. And hindsight should have been a red flag, right? Because if they're saying that they'll only take you if you are being forced to stay in the lab, I thought this was a great thing because I thought it meant like, okay, I'll get a leg up on my project, like speed up. Which because I started the lab in 2019, by 2020 because pandemic and all the lab shut down, I will say like everyone else who started with me and did rotations at that time, they pretty much by March when labs shut down were literally that was their moment of like deciding the labs they were starting in after the rotations, so no one had a project to be working on. So I did feel lucky like early on that stage, like okay, I actually had a few months of data, so I wasn't just sitting there twiddling my thumbs at home, like I had stuff to analyze and new angles to run. But the longer term implications of that, of course, are you're stuck not seeing how other labs operate, right? And how potential red flags or other red flags of how things are done. Like typically, I feel like this is standard beyond American academia. You have lab meetings like weekly, bi-weekly, depending on how big the lab is and if you guys have different subgroups. Um, but my lab, we didn't do lab meetings. I remember thinking it was sus when I came in, but instead, my PI would have one-on-ones with you when he'd come in. He'd come in like 3 times a week, and you'd go into his office by yourself, and it'd be like 2 to 3 hours of just sitting there with the lights out, talking with him, and it would never be about the project. And it, I guess this is, I could go into so many other stories about this, but not having a group lab meeting was really disruptive in the long term because you never knew. We were a small lab, like 6 of us. You never knew what was going on with other people. Um, so I wish I'd had some sort of lab meeting, but lab meetings are pretty common, right? Like doing them
Yeah.
weekly. Yeah.
My lab was at some point just became me and my PI, so the lab meetings were the one-on-one. And then when we got more like people coming in, so I joined up the professor's lab, and then what we do is that after 2 years into your PhD program, like after you complete like a set amount of classes, because you take classes your first 2 years, and in my program that if you're not on a fellowship or your PI is not paying you, or your PI is not paying you while you're doing rotations, so what ended up happening was that I was teaching, rotating, taking classes.
Mhm.
And then at the end of those 2 years comes your candidacy exam. And the candidacy exam varies from department to department, university to university. So we had like a paper critique, and then we had to present like our research project and what we had so far, which was a traumatic experience for me. And I guess we can talk about it during this podcast. I think I'm ready to reveal to the public what had happened to me.
I
At
feel
some
that too, where it's like it's taken me a couple of years to be like, am I willing to talk about this in a public setting?
Yeah, there was a lot of close people that were there where it was coming to a point that I was ready to drop out of the program.
Mhm.
It had very little to do with my PI, very to do with a collaborating project, and
Mhm.
I was very traumatized. I have to say that I was in the most depressing point of my life. I was going to therapy like probably twice a week. Um, yeah, I never want to relive that again. Um, And then after, anyways, we ended up switching some of my projects. I pretty much had to redo my project presentation twice.
Did you guys
Um,
call it qualifying exam?
yeah,
Okay.
we just don't have like an actual test, but I know there were other departments that had actual tests that they had to do,
Yeah,
and I
because
know,
mine was just a presentation. I mean, you had to write like a qualifying exam, so it was essentially a grant proposal was what you were
yeah,
writing.
that's what they wrote. Yeah.
Yeah, because I submitted that afterwards to the NSF, like the GRFP thing, and then we did a presentation in front of our committee where they grill you and everything. But other departments, like I knew one, I thought this was kind of crazy. They made you do your qualifying exams to write a whole grant proposal and defend it in front of a whole committee on a topic that was not going to be your PhD topic, like to purposely test that you could talk about other things that weren't what you were researching, which a part of me gets, but also part of me is like, it's kind of wasting someone's time if they're here for a PhD on a specific topic, and then you're forcing them to like take this hard left turn on something completely separate.
Yeah, the point of us for us to have a paper critique was that it had to be similar to your topic, but it's like so you can determine like the flaws and the good parts of the paper, and they kind of like the your committee grilled you on what you critiqued and what you didn't critique.
Mm,
So like the committee had the paper in advance, and they kind of like were asking questions, and you had to do like a whole presentation on what you're critiquing and explaining the whole paper. Like so,
okay.
it's kind of to showing that you can analyze the data and think critically.
So it's like journal club, but on steroids.
Yes. And
Okay.
then after that, after you pass that part, that's when you move on to doing like your own project, and you're talking about like pretty much writing it an NIH
Okay.
style grant proposal and presenting it to your committee. But I had to do it twice, and we can talk about it at some point during this podcast of how I wrote on two different projects within a span of 6 months.
Yeah,
Um,
stay tuned. I feel there'll be so much juicy tea. Oh gosh, sorry, I knocked my microphone. I feel there'll be so much juicy tea as we're going on this, like dropping like, oh yeah. Because part of me's too, and I feel like you're the same way. I've repressed so much from grad school, where certain times, like as we're talking, like, oh my gosh, I forgot that this happened to me.
Bridges will be burned.
Yeah.
people will not be happy to hear about what I had to say.
Well, I guess you're still in academia. My thing is like, well, I've left academia and I don't plan on going back.
Yeah, I'm not going back to doing research, so that's not like an issue. Anyways, but I'm saying like because that was just one bad experience. I said like my PI was still very good, and he helped me like come go back to my original project, and I ended up finishing my PhD, still getting all the data that I needed, despite the fact that I kind of wasted a whole year working on something. And he was very supportive after my PhD. He only talks well about me as far as I know. At least I get from feedback from when I applied for jobs that I had very outstanding recommendations. So I'm assuming that he is talking well about me.
Oh, that's good.
Um, and I went into the postdoc, which you can optional, right? After you finish your PhD, you can decide what you want to do career-wise.
Optional,
Um,
but I feel like all of academia, if you only listen to the people in academia, they literally tell you that the only step is postdoc. Like, I remember talking to people about what other careers are out there, and all the professors are like, well, postdoc, obviously. It's like, but what if I don't want to be a professor? Well, postdoc, obviously. I'm like, okay, well, what else is out there?
yeah, even for teaching, because I was applying for teaching jobs afterwards. I was like, well, you're not qualified enough. And I'm like, well, I did teach most of my PhD, like it's not.
Yeah. I
Um,
have the PhD. What more do you need from me?
I mean, I get it in a sense for them if like they're hiring like a teaching faculty, they want to make sure that you have teaching experience. Very understandable, but a lot of PhDs don't actually even get any teaching experience through their PhD, so very hard to transition into a teaching position when you have very limited teaching experience. I was lucky enough that I had some teaching experience and I was able to get the jobs after I left the postdoc. And I have to say that the postdoc did help me in a sense, not because I did a postdoc, but because I did a postdoc at Yale. Um,
And I think
just
there's good reasons to do it, and this I feel like we should chat about this later too. There are definitely good reasons to do a postdoc. Like I'm not saying that no one should be doing a postdoc anymore, but I think generally the process in academia is like you don't even think about your career until you get to the postdoc stage. When you should, as a grad student, you should be allowed to be thinking about doing career exploration during grad school. And it goes what you said about the teaching, like you had to wait till your you had teaching experience, you got more of it when you were in a postdoc, and how some grad students, or a lot of them, like I didn't get teaching experience in grad school. It wasn't part of my requirements, which great, I didn't have to do the 60 students a semester. But also, I remember asking if I could do some teaching because I thought it'd be fun to do. And I was told no because it would take away from my lab work. And so it's kind of like that both sides of uh, being overworked and underpaid of like, yeah, you've got the one side where you got this teaching experience, awesome. But then if you're someone like me where I want to teach experience, but it wasn't, that we already had the lab funded and everything. So there wasn't a direct benefit to the lab for me doing teaching. They didn't see my career development or professional development as like any sort of factor or contributing reason why I might want to go do teaching as well.
yeah, I think at Yale they're required to do teaching one semester, and it's required for them to do, but the classes are very small and there's not a lot of work as far as I remember my
Mm-hmm.
students talking about it in my postdoc lab. Um, but my postdoc lab actually was what helped me, I think, get a lot of the teaching positions because there were some techniques that I never learned during my PhD that I learned during my postdocs. And this is what I'm teaching now to a lot of students with some of the things that I've learned during my postdoc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it made me a well-rounded scientist going into the postdoc. I learned everything that I didn't have the resources to learn from my PhD, literally
Mm-hmm.
just because of lack of money. And I think I would
Mm-hmm.
have never learned them at FIU. No, I definitely would have never learned them at FIU. Those kind of resources that some of the big universities have, like Yale, is just like not comparable to my PhD program. But that's
Yeah.
kind of like just to me. But what about you, Chloe? How
I
did
mean,
you?
so similar. It was so second. Well, so in theory, it follows the same pipeline. So the idea is like year one, you do your rotations, which I already alluded to. I didn't do rotation, I went direct admit. Then technically by your second year is when you do like your qualifying exam, which in our department's case was writing that NIH style grant proposal, then presenting a PowerPoint of everything that you've done so far, like your preliminary data essentially, and then getting grilled by a committee. Um, but my department was kind of odd in the sense that even though you were supposed to do your qualifying exam by your second year, most PIs, advisors, had you do it like way later. on like third, fourth year of your PhD. I think I did mine the summer of my third year. So it was like a year before, I think I was about to start my fourth year. I think it was like so super late, quote unquote, in the game. But the reason they'll say they're doing this is, oh, we want to make sure you've got a project, you've got so much preliminary data that by the time you get to that qualifying exam, that QE, we're ready to go with the paper. But really, the reason they have you do that is the longer they can hold off from you having a qualifying exam, the longer they're holding off for you having a committee, like other professors that can help guide you on that project. And you might think, why is the professor doing that? Like, isn't it to everyone's benefit to have more professors in helping out with a project? Well, if you don't have other professors knowing what's going on with your student's life, it's a lot easier to get away with how you treat them or do certain things that other professors might frown upon. And kind of like dictate the narrative of how their project's going. Because once you have other professors' input, they might be like, oh, that's enough for a paper right there, versus your professor might be incentivized to keep you for a few more years to get you to do more work to get a bigger impact paper. So my PI, we didn't do mine until the end of my third year. So I didn't have any other professors to bounce anything off of until I got to that qualifying exam. Once I got there, did it all. It actually mine was kind of, I won't say a joke, but mine was super easy. In part because my professor, he's kind of known for picking people on the committee that he was friends with. So we didn't get really much of a say on who went on our committee, which is not the norm. The norm, at least the norm should be where you get to pick who's on your committee. You're picking professors that are going to have different areas of expertise that your professor might not have to enhance your project. Mine were having people that had nothing to do with my project at all. Like I had a mitochondria guy on mine when I was working on an amyloid body in the nucleus of the cell. It just there was no rhyme or reason to it, just like they were friends with each other. But it made my qualifying exam super easy because none of them really understood the topic except my professor. So we got in, gave the spiel. I was like, okay, awesome, it seems novel. You've already got enough stuff for a paper. Let's see it happen. Um, and once you finish your qualifying exam, that's kind of when the slog begins, because I feel like up until your qualifying exam, you're like, oh, have I done enough? Am I a real scientist? Then you do that and you pass that qualifying exam mark. Like, okay, I guess the next step is really to get that paper out and be done. And that's the true grind. So mine was, because I'd already finished up to my third year, I did another year in the lab because I was banking on doing my whole PhD in 4 years. Uh, Hindsight, I mean, I still think a PhD is possible to do within 4 years. I think, because say Europe, people get their PhDs in 3 to 4 years. There's nothing stopping it research-wise. I think a lot of people in America getting their PhDs in 3 and 4 years. It's simply down to how the academic system's structured and the incentives for a professor wanting to keep you on. So by the end of my fourth year, I was supposed to do, and did you guys do something similar like sufficiency? So before you defend, it's like a few months leading up to your defense. That's kind of like the scary part where you present everything and they tell you whether or not essentially you've got enough to get your PhD.
No, but we had annual evaluations each year to see your progress. So I had to do presentations for my whole committee every year. And then they somewhat like kind of figured out how my process is going. And then I think it was my fifth year or my last one where they were like, yeah, we're okay with you wrapping everything up and defending.
That's also a good point. So you've got, in most American institutions, once you have that qualifying exam, every 6 months to a year, you're going to have meetings with your committee to give them updates. And that's kind of the point where they can give their input and see the status. And in theory, that's also checks and balances so that your professor can't just like keep you for an indefinite amount of years. You've got other professors being like, no, actually, they've done enough. I think you can graduate. My professor did not allow us to do any of those. We were supposed to have them in the department, and he just didn't let us have those meetings. In fact, I got chewed out one time because I met with one of my committee members without him. Um, to talk about something, like he'd reached out to me and was like, hey, I've read this paper, I thought of you, this would be a really cool angle for your project, come chat with me. We had a really good chat about it all, and I come back and I tell my advisor about it, and he's like, how dare you go talk to this professor without me? And I was like, he's on my committee. But in theory, you're supposed to do committee meetings every 6 months a year. And so we do, the sufficiency is kind of like our last committee meeting before your defense. And it's essentially so that when you get to your defense, it's not like you're worried if you're going to pass or not. Because at the defense point, you're usually inviting like friends and family and stuff like that. Um, you don't want them there if you don't know that you're going to pass or not, I guess. So sufficiency usually happens. I think the starts like a 3 month clock from when you do it, and the sufficiency meeting is same sort of like big presentation. Usually you're showing your paper. In my case, I was showing like the paper we were about to submit, um, and that's also when you get grilled. But those are going to be like the grilling where you might not make it out alive versus the defense. They're going to grill you, but usually you'll make it out alive. So my sufficiency, I got grilled really hard, and I got something called conditional sufficiency, which is a very not many people use this term or even know what it is unless you're in this sort of situation where my professor wasn't publishing my paper. So they called it conditional sufficiency, saying, okay, your professor needs to let you submit the paper, then you can be allowed to go through the process. Because like most grad school programs have a requirement of having, a paper submitted or accepted, etc.
Which,
Did
yeah, I
did
have.
you guys have that requirement?
Yeah, it was like an unspoken requirement. Like, there's no set requirement of how many papers you have to publish, but it was very much like you have to have enough data for a publication in order for you to finish. But speaking of like 6 months to a year meetings at FIU, you have to fill out a form that you submit to the university saying that you've had this meeting and you put in the date on where you've had this meeting. And then your PI has to go in and put in comments about that meeting and explain what had happened in that meeting. And so to you, it's like a whole official form. So there's like no going around it. You have to have like a meeting with your
So more
committee.
checks and balances really to make
Yeah.
sure that these things are happening. Because yeah, my school
It's a
did not
university
have
wide.
that.
It wasn't even a program wide. It's a university wide thing. So it was like you have to submit this form.
And very well, my university could have had requirements like that. It's just if it goes a lot to enforcement too. If no one's actually doing them, then no one cares. But then, so yeah, the end goal after you do sufficiency is to do the defense, where you have everyone come and you give a big presentation. Then you do a private part where people grill you on your questions, and then usually at the end they shake your hand and say, "Congratulations, doctor."
Yeah, for us, for my defense, my PI even had never even heard me do the presentation yet. He like had an overview, so I had a meeting with him, and I would like when like kind of like quickly like showing him what I'll be presenting, but I didn't like do like a full practice on the presentation. And then he's like, "You want to do a full practice?" I'm like, "Nah, I just." I'm like, during my PhD, I was a very anxious presenter. Like, I would get very nervous. Like, I would have like sweaty hands. Like, I just could, public speaking in the early PhD was very hard. So at the end of the PhD, I was like, that's fine. I can do this. My PI was very nervous about me doing the presentation because he's seen me early on in my career. But I think at the end, everyone was very happy, especially because for my presentation, we had like General Electric also on Zoom call because they were a part of this project that I was presenting. So it was like a lot of like company people, my friends, the professors. So I think my PI was a little nervous, but and he was very happy because the presentation went very well. I was kind of numb afterwards, but I was like, I don't know what had happened, but
I blacked out on
yeah.
mine, but yeah, I don't remember anything.
I'm like, I remember bits and pieces of the presentation, but I don't remember anything I said. And I just remember sitting afterwards and just being like, well, oh,
Was
all
it
this
really
work.
anticlimactic for
Yeah.
you as well? Because me, I was like, I had a flight to get back because I lived in DC
I was
at the
in
time.
Connecticut, yeah. So I
Yeah,
flew there to defend.
yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, I've got this done, and then I went to like a happy hour with some friends, and they were like, oh yeah, how is it? And I was like, I just what you said, numb. Like I don't remember, blacked out during it, and now I'm just like, wow, all that 5+ years of work is just done. Like it just suddenly you drop it now, and it's like you're on to something else. It's such a weird time. I was expecting like fireworks or some like celebratory, not from other people, but like in my head, like it's become such a hyped up moment of getting the PhD, and then once you get there, it's just like, oh, that's it.
Yeah, even the whole year during my post, like I was like, wow, like I have a PhD. I'm like, I don't know why I'm like letting people try to like tell me that I'm wrong. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, okay, I can't be wrong. It's just it was more like I'll talk about it in this
But
podcast.
the confidence thing for sure. Like when people, yeah, I still know. I mean, I became so jaded for my PhD that even when I got my PhD, I didn't like calling myself that for a while. It's still like I have PhD on like my official things, like say LinkedIn and stuff. But this is actually the first time when we started this podcast and I called myself Dr. Chloe Kirk. That's probably the first time I've ever done that because I don't usually like to. Yeah, I felt like it was something we should start with, so people know we're like official former or from the academic sphere, right? To give ourselves a bit of cred. But I don't know. I don't vibe with the PhD as much as I thought I would. I thought I'd put PhD on everything, like my lettering heading when I'm sending out mail.
Yeah, I feel like it's too, like, at least for my students, like I don't want to seem like I am not approachable, so I don't call myself like, oh, you can only call me like Dr. Goodyear, but no, I'm like, you can call me Professor Victoria. I'm like, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to be. I just don't want to be called Miss or Mrs.
Yeah, I
Because
don't
I
like
just
that, but it's separate from even like the doctor versus miss. I just kind of feel like it's a bit degrading at this point.
yes,
I don't
that's
know.
why. Because I'm like, you're not gonna call your male professor Mister,
Hmm.
so please don't call me Miss.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I'm perfectly fine. I'm like, you can call me professor. I'm like, I don't want you to try to pronounce my last name. I don't want you to call me doctor. I'm perfectly fine. You can come up to me and say Professor Victoria, and I'm okay with that. I'm like, I
I feel like
feel like
that's
the doctor is a little too official for me.
also I feel like it's an interesting like old guard versus new guard, like the younger, because I feel like it's pretty common between like our generation of people being like, yeah, I don't necessarily want to be called doctor. But like the older generation, like my PI, everyone called him doctor.
Yes.
Like that was day one. I remember even being told by the other grad students, yeah, you say doctor last name. I was like, oh, you don't say first name stuff? It's like, no, no, no. It's Doctor so and so.
Yeah, so during my PhD, everyone was like doctor, doctor, doctor.
Hmm.
And then I went to Yale, and everyone calls their professors by their first name.
That's
PhD
culture shock.
students, everyone, like everyone just calls each other by their first name. No one's ever approaching the formal titles, which I think it creates a very different environment, very much a more collaborative, friendly environment versus having to like know the hierarchy. Yeah, I never called my postdoc professor by his last name. Um, I don't call my husband's professor by his last name. It's very much on like my husband just calls him by his last name, but not like doctor. Like he's just like
Yeah.
um, so it makes it a much, I think, easier to work in that kind of environment versus knowing like, oh, this is your boss and this is like so formal setting.
Yeah. Well, we've already been chatting for
Yeah.
50 minutes.
Yeah.
I was worried as like the first episode is it going to be very short. Is there anything else we should chat about before we close it off?
No, I think this is good, and I think that we can, moving forward, so we can start off with sharing a bit of some of our traumatic experiences, and then we can move on to maybe discussing everyone else's experience and advices.
Yeah, so I feel like the structure will be, so this is our flagship episode. Thank you for everyone who's made it this far. The future episodes, what we're probably going to do is we're going to have maybe like the day before the podcast we decide to record, a little question box for you guys of what topics you'd like us to chat about. And we'll probably pull from that to exactly what Vicky said is probably start more the personal side of like our experiences and how that relates to the topic, and then take that into the bigger picture. But I think something else we want to do is almost like an anonymous lab story time. So having an anonymous Google form where you can fill it out, share, the good, the bad, the ugly of anything that you've dealt with in academia, and then we'll talk about a couple at the end of each episode that relate to the topic for that week. Cool. But expect us every other week for the spring semester. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. What do the YouTubers say? Is it like, subscribe?
Yeah, I think it's the YouTubers.
What do podcasters say instead? Is it also like and subscribe or
I think so
follow?
too.
Or do whatever the podcasters tell you to do. Tune in for next time. And thanks for being here. We're Reforming Academia with your hosts, Chloe and Victoria. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys next time.
Bye.
Science is for everyone.